Imagine discovering an ancient city without leaving the comfort of your home. In 1963, a man in the Nevşehir province of Turkey did exactly that. He was renovating his house. He knocked down a wall in his basement and found a mysterious room. He continued digging and saw a tunnel. This is how Derinkuyu underground city was found. Derinkuyu is one of the deepest multi-level underground settlements of Cappadocia and in all of Turkey. This engineering masterpiece has 8 levels. The inhabitants living on those floors had access to cellars, storage areas, chapels, a school, a study room, and other structures. All floors are connected by an extensive network of tunnels. It's believed that the underground city was built as a shelter. You can't see the construction from the outside. Its depth is approximately 279 feet. The complex was large enough to shelter about 20,000 people, plus their livestock and food supplies. There's also a 180-foot ventilation shaft. People used it both for ventilation and as a well. The well supplied water both to the villagers living on the surface and to those hiding in the underground city. Interestingly, those living on the bottom levels were able to cut off the water supply for the upper and ground levels. This kept the water safe from potential poisoning. The place was designed for protection. The tunnels could be blocked from the inside with huge round rolling stone doors. The passageways were extremely narrow. Potential invaders had to enter the tunnels one at a time. Seems like they thought of everything in the 7th century BCE. Archaeologists believed the Phrygians were the ones who first built the levels. After them, the structure was used and enhanced in Roman times. This was when the chapels were added. The golden time of Derinkuyu, however, was during the Byzantine era. But how did these people manage to create such tunnels? Well, the rock they carved them into wasn't usual. It was soft volcanic rock. It appeared due to a geological process that began millions of years ago. Volcanic eruptions covered the area in thick ash. It then solidified into this soft rock. When the natural forces of wind and water eroded softer parts, only hard elements remained. Fun fact, fairy chimneys are also made of intricately shaped volcanic soft rock, but they formed naturally without any human intervention. I'm still in Turkey, but this time, my destination is Çanakkale, where a myth came to life. For 3,000 years, people believed that Homer's Iliad was fiction and that Troy never existed. In 1863, everything changed. Expatriate Frank Calvert discovered ancient ruins in western Turkey. He was convinced they belonged to the ancient city of Troy. Heinrich Schliemann examined this area in 1868. That's when Troy saw sunlight again after all those centuries. Troy has complex layers. Over the years, 9 ancient cities were built on top of one another. Historians say that the area was strategically located between Europe and Asia, so it became a prosperous trade and cultural center. This strategic position made Troy attractive throughout history. After the Trojan conflict, the city was abandoned between the years 1100 to 700 BCE. Then Greek settlers rediscovered the area, and Alexander the Great ruled there. The Romans then invaded the city. Speaking of this event, the first thing you would see when visiting the site is a replica of the wooden Trojan horse from a movie shot in 2004. The next stop is Lothal. In the 1950s, Lothal and several other Harappan sites were discovered in India. These new provinces extended the boundaries of the Indus Valley civilization. Lothal was an important part of the Harappan civilization. It had vast cotton and rice fields. Plus, it had a bead-making factory. Beads were made from semi-precious stones, like agate. Many of these beads were later found in Mesopotamia, which serves as evidence that Lothal was a thriving trading port. Archaeologists believe that the city was part of an ancient trade route. Traces of agriculture? Check. Traces of trade? Check. What else? The remains of residential buildings, streets, bathing pavements, and drains. Some real city planning, and impressive examples of early urbanization. The town was well constructed. They were modern houses. Some of them had 6 rooms, bathrooms, a large courtyard, and even a veranda. Lothal also had the world's oldest known dock. It linked the city with the Sabarmati River and the trade route. The ancient Mayan city of Calakmul is located in southern Mexico in the tropical forest of the Tierras Bajas. From 500 CE to 800 CE, Calakmul was home to over 50,000 people. There was a central plaza surrounded by outer districts. And if we count both the inhabitants of all those outer areas and those who lived in the center, Calakmul had a population of more than 1.5 million people. It was a city that was habitable for 12 centuries. It's believed that the place had more constructions than any other excavated Maya settlements in the region. After 1000 CE, the Maya civilization there faced a downfall. The settlement that was once the center of Mesoamerica was almost completely abandoned. The ancient city was at the heart of the second largest tropical forest in America. The site is well preserved, so today, if you were to visit it, you would be able to picture what life looked like in ancient Mayan times. The city remains include architectural complexes and sculpted monuments, defensive systems, quarries, water management features, agricultural terraces, massive temple pyramids, and palaces, not to mention a variety of body ornaments and other accompanying objects. It proves that complex state-organized societies lived in this tropical forest. The Mayans depicted nature in their paintings, pottery, sculptures, rituals, and even food. I'm moving on to a place people thought didn't really exist. The city of Thonis Heraklion appeared only in a few inscriptions and ancient texts. Turns out, it was waiting to be discovered for thousands of years. Scientists searched the majority of the coast of Egypt. But then, archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team detected a colossal face looking at them from under the water. The ancient city of Heraklion was discovered completely submerged 4 miles off Alexandria's coast. In the ruins of the lost city, there were 64 ships, 700 anchors, and a treasure trove of gold coins. Archaeologists consider a 16-foot tall statue and the temple remains the most important findings discovered by the expedition. Back then, the city had ceremonies and celebrations that took place in the Temple of Amun. The ruins and artifacts were made from granite and diorite, so they were in good condition even after having been in contact with water for centuries. They give people a glimpse into what life was like 2,300 years ago in one of the most important trade ports of the world. The city had a network of canals. You can think of it as an ancient Egyptian Venice. The canals linked many separate harbors and anchorages. Towers, temples, houses, and other structures were also linked by bridges. Thonis Heraklion was the country's main port for international trade and the collection of taxes. No one really knows how the city ended up submerged, but archaeologists connect it with natural causes. At the end of the 2nd century BCE, most probably after a flood, Heraklion got covered with water. Then, Alexandria, the city founded by Alexander the Great, became more glorious than Heraklion. Before Alexandria's fame, Heraklion was the main port of entry to Egypt. So, after the disaster, many ships heading for Heraklion had to change their route and go to Alexandria. Heraklion lost its glory until its rediscovery in 1933. Mesa Verde is an American national park in Colorado. The park is the largest archaeological preserve in the U.S., with more than 5,000 sites, including 600 cliff dwellings. Mesa Verde means green table in Spanish. The name comes from the shape of the mountains in the area, with flat tops and steep sides. The park is an ancestral Puebloan archaeological site. Starting from 7500 BCE, a group of nomadic Paleo-Indians seasonally lived in Mesa Verde. They were hunters, gatherers, and crop farmers. They built the first pueblos in the region. By the end of the 12th century, the Mesa Verdeans began constructing massive cliff dwellings, which are now the best-known structures in the park.
So, imagine you're 15 and you get bored of playing video games. Instead, to pass the time, you decide to give some attention to an old hobby of yours, tracking down lost Mayan cities. You've heard that some ancient civilizations are said to have built entire cities based on constellations, so you decide to check out whether that was true for the Mayans. You find a book containing all the constellations the Mayan civilization believed to exist. You open good old Google Maps and map every ancient Mayan city discovered to date. You start seeing that this information actually matches. And truly, the biggest ancient Mayan cities correspond to the brightest and biggest stars of the Mayan constellations. Okay, this is getting interesting. You manage to map out over 100 ancient cities when you suddenly notice something strange. There's an area in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico where archaeologists have unearthed 2 Mayan cities. But on the constellation map, there are 3 stars. Could this mean there is a long-lost city waiting to be discovered nearby? You might think this sounds too daydreaming, but the story is actually true. The previous account happened to a Canadian teenager named William Gaddery. The boy is known as a science genius and had even won an award for the constellation theory we presented just now. When he noticed that a 3rd city was missing from the 23rd constellation he was examining, he began to scour the internet for satellite pictures that could help him solve this mystery. He looked into images from NASA, JAXA, a Japan-based satellite company, and Google Earth. These images were still insufficient to answer his questions, so he reached out to a friend inside the Canadian Space Agency. His friend provided him with state-of-the-art satellite imagery that gave him the answer he was looking for. According to the images, there is a large square area right on the border of Mexico and Belize, which looks like the remains of a city. William took the images to a remote sensing expert known as Dr. Armand Laroque from the University of New Brunswick. They studied the images thoroughly and concluded that the area could be housing 30 buildings and even a large pyramid. The scientific and archaeological community went crazy with the 15-year-old's discovery. Could this really be true? Some background. Lost Mayan cities began to be unearthed in the mid-20th century. Since then, ruins from cities such as Tikal, Palenque, and Uxmal have been rediscovered. The Mayans were one of the biggest pre-Columbian civilizations living in the Americas. They began to settle in the area as early as 1500 BCE. Experts believe that, at its height, the Mayan civilization consisted of over 40 cities with a population of millions of people. That's a crowd. And their cities were pretty interesting. Their civilization spanned over Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Belize. They survived mainly on agriculture, so they developed a complex irrigation system in most of their cities. They built a series of ceremonial buildings, pyramids, plazas, and even courts for ball games. The Mayans were keen pyramid builders, but they also developed an advanced astronomical system. With whatever ancient technology they had, they were able to predict the exact location of planets such as Venus and Mars, and they were able to predict the exact dates of eclipses. That's why the methodology William used to discover this long-lost Mayan city was unusual, but not completely surreal. The Mayans were keen astronomers, so it wouldn't be too strange that they built their major architectural feats in relation to the sky, would it? And they wouldn't be the first ones to be doing so. There is a famous fringe of Egyptology dedicated to studying how the Giza pyramids were built in perfect alignment with the Orion constellation, meaning that each pyramid was purposely built to align with one of the major stars of Orion's belt. According to William, he first had the idea to look at the Mayan constellations because he couldn't understand why the Mayans built their cities where they built them. Most major cities, such as Chichen Itza and Uxmal, aren't near any rivers or significant bodies of water. Instead, they're built on marginal lands and on top of mountains, which confused the 15-year-old. His next thought was that it might have something to do with astronomy. William named the new city he discovered Mouth of Fire, which is also my nickname, and he even won a merit award for his hard work. However, his theory was very much contested inside the archaeological community. and many Mayan experts work to debunk Williams' findings. Some archaeologists say that constellation theories are too unscientific. Anthony Aveni, a renowned anthropologist and astronomer, referred to Williams' methodology as an act of creative imagination. He explained that there is no way to be sure what the Mayan constellations really were. It's all just hypothetical. Another debunking of Williams' findings came from Mayanist David Stewart, who said that the object identified on the satellite imagery is nothing but an old cornfield. His claim was supported by an expedition that took place near the area in 2021, when the archaeologists present reported there was nothing at all in this area. Still, a 15-year-old boy almost found a long-lost Mayan city, which is pretty exciting if you ask me. Similar techniques as those used by William are actually being used to unearth lost civilizations all over the world. According to space archaeologist Sarah Parquet, satellite imagery has been a key player in discovering ancient cities in Egypt and other places. Sarah herself spends most of her days scouring images for any sign of where there could have been cities long ago. What happens, she says, is that any time you have something buried, it's going to be covered either by vegetation, soil or sand, or some other modern construction on top of it. In order to assess whether there is something hidden under large canopies of vegetation or not, she uses infrared technology, for instance. A major recent discovery in Brazil was done in a similar way. Satellite imagery detected a network of trenches dating back to 200 to 1200 CE. These suggest settlements that could have supported around 60,000 people. But in this case, the satellite imagery did indeed correspond to what was on the ground. Researchers from the University of Florida found several mounds that were accompanied by ditches and geoglyphs. Archaeologists also found remnants of carefully designed walls, centered around plazas, much like the type of construction done by the ancient Mayans. Advances in satellite tech have also shed new light on long-discovered ancient Mayan cities, such as Tikal. Located in the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, Tikal is believed to have been the capital of the ancient Mayan Empire. At its height, it was comparable in importance to cities such as London or New York in today's world. It was composed of a series of complex monuments, many of them believed to have been the resting places of kings and chiefs. Tikal is already known to have been big, but recent discoveries show it could have been even 3 times larger than what scientists originally believed. The main discovery revolves around a fortification on the outskirts of the city, indicating how far the original city stretched. And new discoveries still take place. In 2017, researchers also unearthed new clues regarding the potential causes of the decline of the Mayan civilization. Using data from a site in Siwa, located 62 miles southwest of Tikal, scientists analyzed radiocarbon data from ceramics and archaeological excavations to extract new information about the sudden demise of this great civilization. The information shows that, instead of a sudden collapse, the Mayans most likely collapsed in waves of social instability and political crises. These events are believed to have deteriorated Mayan city centers and began causing the dispersion of the Mayan population. Wow, it seems like it's a prime time to uncover ancient ruins. What do you say? Will you give it a try as well?
It was April 10th, 1912. Richard had just departed from Southampton, England, aboard the most famous ship of the time, dubbed the Unsinkable. Since he had just witnessed a near collision with the SS City of New York, he decided to write to his wife and report the unfortunate and frightening event. "My dearest Sal," he wrote, "we got away yesterday after a lot of trouble." Little did he know that a mere 4 days later, both his pen and the ship he was on would be lost forever at the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean. Was this some sort of bad omen? Did Richard actually foresee what was about to happen to the ship he was on? In case you haven't figured it out by now, Mr. Richard Geddes was aboard the Titanic on the day that he wrote the letter to his wife. On April 14th, 1912, the ship seemed to have been lost forever. Along with it, so many secrets and treasures have settled at the bottom of the ocean. It took until 1985 for the Titanic's wreck to be finally rediscovered using state-of-the-art sonar technology. Ever since then, they've managed to recover thousands of items from the Titanic, and many of them went on display or auction. Things like jewelry, a life jacket, a menu from the ship's restaurant, or even a sample square of carpet from the first-class stateroom have all captivated the public's attention, just like the many stories of the people on board. Scientists have even tried to come up with strategies to get the Titanic back up altogether to properly study it and stop it from getting more and more damaged at the bottom of the ocean. Some have suggested filling the wreck with ping pong balls to make it float, while others even considered injecting it with 180,000 tons of Vaseline. Another idea was to use 450,000 tons of liquid nitrogen to trap it in an iceberg that would float to the surface. But they eventually had to let go of all these potential strategies since the Titanic is way too fragile to ever be recovered. The Titanic may be one of the most interesting ships lying at the bottom of the ocean, at least in popular culture, but deep-sea divers have a lot of other stories to share. Planes also sometimes find their way to the bottom of the ocean. Deep-sea divers in Oahu, Hawaii, came across the wreckage of an F-4U Corsair plane. It seems to have crashed into the ocean in 1946, as it didn't have sufficient fuel. If you can dive deep enough, you might even stumble upon statues and lost artifacts, like those found in the world's only underwater archaeological park off the coast of Naples, Italy. It features the ruins of the ancient Roman city of Baia. The underwater statues found here are breathtaking, to say the least. In an ironic twist of events, some of the equipment we intended to use to get us to the moon was lost at the bottom of the sea for a very long time. But how did that happen? Beginning from the late 1960s and ending in the early 70s, many Apollo rockets were launched to orbit the Earth and the Moon. When reaching altitudes of about 38 miles, the first portion of the spacecraft, including the engines, needed to separate. People thought these components got destroyed or lost forever. But were they really? In 2012, a team of specialists discovered a bunch of rocket engines 14,000 feet off the coast of Florida. They have since gone through a 2-year renovation plan and are now on display at Seattle's Museum of Flight. Can you imagine stumbling upon a whole city underwater? Back in 2001, a lost city was discovered in the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India. Some archaeologists believe it to be the oldest city in history. By comparison, it's almost the size of Manhattan and features massive walls and even plazas. They stumbled upon pieces of sculpture, artwork, and even what looked like ancient wooden furniture, believed to date back up to 9,500 years ago and 5,000 years older than any city previously discovered. Okay, how about an underwater river? I can't even imagine what that would look like, but some deep divers claim to have seen it south of Tulum, Mexico. Is that even possible? Well, not really, since the Cenote Angelita Cave is not a true river, but a very special type of optical illusion. It's formed by a halocline, meaning a cloud of hydrogen sulfide at the bottom of this underwater cave. Turns out you can actually swim right through this cloud, which makes you feel like you're swimming through a flowing body of water. Not all things discovered underwater are inanimate objects. Some of them are actually quite scary sea creatures. A jellyfish might not be on your list of things to look out for if you can avoid the stings. But this giant one, also known as a lion's mane jellyfish, is the largest known species of its kind. In all fairness, you'll only uncover it if you happen to dive into the waters of the Arctic, Northern Atlantic, and Northern Pacific Oceans. You surely won't miss it, since it stretches across 120 feet from the top to the bottom of its tentacles. When it comes to deep-sea diving, a lot of people are looking to discover some lost treasure. One diver was lucky enough to have hit the literal jackpot when he came upon nearly $1 million worth of treasure on the bottom of the seabed. That was back in 2015, when this lucky diver was swimming just off the coast of Florida. What did he find, you might ask? Well, about 51 gold coins, 40 feet of gold chain, and a rare single coin that was tailored for the King of Spain, Philip V. Speaking of people looking for lost treasures, divers also sometimes found pirate ships. They discovered one of these pirate shipwrecks in 2015 off the coast of Colombia. It dates back to the 18th century. The value of this forgotten ship was estimated to be between $4 billion and $17 billion, as it contained treasures, precious stones, gold, and countless other really valuable items. By comparison, a whole island in the Bahamas is up for grabs at $75 million. A computer is the last thing you'd ever expect to discover underwater, right? And this was no regular computer, but an ancient one. And yet, someone stumbled upon it between 1900 and 1901 on the spot of a shipwreck located off one Greek island. Researchers believe this weird stone contraption to be the earliest form of a computer. It was designed to serve many purposes, such as predicting astronomical positions and eclipses on the calendar. Since humanity lost most of the technology used back then, it was wonderful to rediscover it so many years later. It let us piece together many of the ancient Greeks' accomplishments. The computer is now at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, should you ever want to check it out in person. This has to be one of the most mysterious places on Earth. It's called the Mariana Trench, and it's the deepest part of the Earth's oceans. We really don't know how deep it is, since it's so difficult to measure, but it's somewhere around 7 miles deep and 5 times longer than the Grand Canyon. They first studied this massive underwater hole back in 1875 using a weighted rope. Back in 2012, a Canadian film director named James Cameron reached the bottom of the trench in the submersible vessel Deep Sea Challenger. Some of the most bizarre creatures on the planet call this place their home, including the Dumbo octopus, the sea cucumber, and the goblin shark. The Mariana Trench took its name after the nearby Mariana Islands, which are named Las Marianas in honor of the Spanish Queen Mariana of Austria. China's Yunnan province has a county that's situated right in the valley between 2 mountains and on either side of the Nanqi River. And this place stretches quite far. It's considered to be the narrowest city in the world. Yanjin County is connected by a few bridges and has many amazing colorful buildings among the riverbank. In the upper levels of the town, a bit away from the river, there are many shops and restaurants pinned side to side, both traditional and modern looking. You can walk along the road with the river right below you and know that you're standing in the middle of the city. Well, sort of. Technically, the middle of the city are the bridges. The county is 37 miles north to south and 25 miles east to west, including the mountains. The population is almost 500,000 people, and the territory is more than 770 square miles. There are 2 rivers that split into 3 parts. If you're standing on either side of the river, you'll notice how close the other side of town is. Despite the length of the city, there aren't that many bridges around. The main hub is located down by the river, which is at 1,100 feet. The highest elevation goes up to 7,200 feet. Because the city is built in such a unique way, the weather pattern is specific to the county. The summers are really hot, especially by the river, and the winters are very wet. That's all thanks to the geographical location. The town is 100 feet at its thinnest and 1,000 feet at its widest. To put that in perspective, the narrowest part is shorter than an Olympic pool, and the widest is around 7 of those. The city is almost impossible to get lost in, but it even has a railway system to transport people out of town and from one end to another. It's situated slightly above the river towards the mountains and goes through a small tunnel in one of them. You can catch some amazing views while relaxing on a smooth train ride. Because the town is so narrow and real estate so limited, most of the apartment buildings are concentrated along the riverbank. You can literally dive from any balcony and swim in the river. But some of those spots aren't safe for swimming, since the river isn't smooth. The buildings have pillars in the foundation to prevent any potential river flooding in case the water levels rise. The river doesn't exactly flow in a perfectly straight line, but rather a series of jagged turns and corners. So, from an aerial point of view, the whole town resembles a slithering snake. Depending where the buildings are, the first floor will sometimes be found on the 5th. The bottom 4 floors are just pillars supporting the building. Some buildings are quite tall, so you can get some amazing views, while others are closer to the ground. Either way, you gotta admire the creativity put into the engineering. To build a whole town in such a place isn't easy. Besides the town being charming as it is, the cultural aspect is another reason to visit this place. Once a year, the Dancing Flower Festival takes place. A group of locals dress up in traditional clothes in a special space where the dancing is. There's also the old town of Ducha. Even though most of the town adopted modern ways of living, they still keep the old traditional architecture around. This little charming spectacle is more than 2,200 years old and was an important passage linking Yunnan province and central China during the 3rd century. The entrance to the old town combines the ancient architecture with modern designs. At the entrance of the town is the famous Old Pavilion. Walking along its roads makes you feel like you're in the ancient times. They're all rugged, yet still well preserved since they built them centuries ago. And nearby is the mountain scenery, which has limestone peaks covered with flowers and herbs. You can get lost in a natural maze of trees and rocks. This place is an escape from the hustle and bustle of the main town, and isn't so far away either. The town has a deep history and has been populated for hundreds of years. The county was famous for its salt trade, since it's strategically one of the best routes for caravans and traders. But sadly, the economic situation isn't easy for imports today. Since there's only one access road to the town, trucks bringing in goods are always limited. It does well on tourism for foreigners and local Chinese too. The old town of Lijiang is another charming town in the same province as Yanjin. The town is built on an uneven landscape, but adapted to it perfectly. In ancient times, the location served as a strategic point for trade between surrounding provinces, and even connected with the Silk Road. It was also a cultural melting pot between different ethnic groups in the region for over 800 years. So, most of the traditions and architecture are a result of all those years of trading and sharing and mixing different cultures. It's also a good location that gives access through the mountains. The rivers and springs flow down to the town through ancient canals that are still used to this day. The town is divided into the Dayan Old Town, Baisha, and Shuye. Dayan Old Town was considered to be the commercial center for Lijiang. It has amazing architecture that feels like you're in some kind of movie. Many of the buildings have unique tiled roofs and arched gateways, all carved with murals. This part of town still has some of its old landmarks, even today. They even preserved some of the utensils from the past. The Baisha isn't that far north of the Dayan Old Town and comprises housing units that are centuries old. The Shuye housing is located northwest of the Old Town and arranged in the mountains surrounded by lots of water. The water system is distributed very neatly and keeps the charm of the town. Here, you can find a blend of many cultures and traditions collected throughout the centuries. The old town of Lijiang is a unity between people and nature. They utilize the mountains, trees, rivers, and architecture to create a perfect harmony for living. The water originally comes from the snowy mountains and flows to the town and supplies the farms. The whole town itself is built around the water, which influenced the style, landscape, urban layout, and everything else in between. Many canals are linked to the buildings and alleyways to make sure the town doesn't go dry. Yangshuo is famous for its bamboo cruise boats for fishing and transportation. It's surrounded by broad expanses of land and mountains in the background. In these boat tours, you can have an up-close experience of the traditional village life and how they fish to sustain themselves. You can even find some unique wildlife lurking around. Besides the river, the town is located in the center of the mountains, with the river not too far away. The marketplace is buzzing with local artisans, displaying their works and art for tourists to bring home. You can find cycling trips in various places and let the cheerful atmosphere sink in. Moon Hill is famous for the amazing panoramic view of the mountain peaks and the rest of the province. You can also check out the water cave if you have an extra taste for adventure. And while you're at it, you can go climbing, kayaking, and trekking. To get an even better view of everything, you can catch a ride on a hot air balloon that'll float you to the top and immerse yourself in the beautiful landscape. you can get a view of the stone village perched on top of a hill surrounded by walls dating back centuries. The place is around 1400 years old and is also a mix between different ethnic groups, adding the richness to the culture. Many locals have kept the same festivals and customs, but even though the place has deeply rooted cultural traditions, it's adapted to the modern ways of life.
The Amazon River, the boat, and dense jungle on both sides. All is silent. Only the engine is revving, and you look around nervously under the earnest gaze of the Peruvian guide. Suddenly, the man smiles and points ahead. This is it. You've finally arrived at Iquitos. The city is hidden deep within the Amazon rainforest. On one side, Iquitos is surrounded by water, and on the other lies thick, impenetrable rainforest as far as the eye can see, making this city extremely difficult to reach. First, you had to fly to Peru's capital, Lima, a vibrant coastal city. From there, you traveled by bus through Peru's vast jagged mountains before being plunged into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. 3 days into this bus journey, you reached a small town where the road suddenly stopped. At over 140 square miles, Iquitos is the largest continental city in the world that cannot be reached by road. You're still over 200 miles away from Iquitos, so from here you take a boat ride along the hot, humid Amazon River before finally reaching the remote city 5 days after you left Lima. When you arrive in the city, you notice many of the houses are built on tall stilts. This is because, in the springtime, the river surrounding Iquitos swells up, submerging parts of the city in water. For this, Iquitos has been nicknamed the Venice of the Amazon. The stilted houses are tall enough to avoid the murky waters of the Amazon River. You hear loud buzzing coming from all around the city. It sounds like a gang of bikers have arrived. In reality, these are motocarrios. There are very few cars in Iquitos. Instead, they have motorcycles with small passenger cabins attached to them. There are around 45,000 of these things whizzing around Iquitos, making the city very noisy. Your trip to the most isolated places has just begun. So, you head to Norway and arrive in the capital city Oslo. Immediately, you hop on another plane. After a 3-hour flight, you land at the world's northernmost public airport, Longyearbyen. You step off the plane to see a small and colorful town enclosed by snow-topped mountains. There's no settlement further to the north than this. Longyearbyen translates to the Long Year Town, named after its American founder, coal miner John Longyear. You take a walk along the coast of the small town. The water is a beautiful crystal blue. You decide to dip your toe in to test it out. Ow! Bad idea. The average temperature of the water here is 32 degrees, making it ice cold. In the distance, you can make out a fuzzy white creature. It's a polar bear. In fact, it's a group of them. In Longyearbyen, polar bears famously outnumber humans. Around 3,000 of these animals populate the area compared to the human population of 2,300. Finally, the sun sets. You grab a blanket and sit back to take in the stunning view of the northern lights. Now, imagine you're walking in the scorching heat across Egypt's Great Sand Sea. You've been walking for miles, hours, days even, dreaming of water, greenery, and a place to rest, when suddenly you come across a small settlement with olive groves, palm trees, and even freshwater springs. This isn't a heat-induced mirage. It's the Siwa Oasis, an Egyptian city of 23,000 people and a miracle of nature. You travel here by flying to Egypt's capital, Cairo, and then embarking on a lengthy and desolate bus ride across the desert. When you finally spot some greenery amongst the sand, you have reached the Siwa Oasis. After refreshing yourself in the cool waters of the springs, you explore the city further and come across ancient ruins. This city has existed since 10,000 BCE, and many historical remnants can still be found there today. Amongst these ruins, you notice there are newer buildings. These are where the modern-day Siwi people live. You spend some time with the Siwi, a friendly and unique community of Egyptians. They tell you all about their city. The Siwa Oasis is located in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and due to its harsh climate, it's one of the most remote cities in the world. You notice how dry the air is and how scorching the sun feels. Reaching highs of 118 degrees Fahrenheit, this heat makes the Siwa Oasis a difficult place to live. It's time to travel to a more balanced climate. You head northeast and arrive in Russia's capital, Moscow. From there, you take a flight east again, traveling further and further across Russia until you're closer to Alaska than to Moscow. You've reached the city of Petropavlovsk, which translates to City of Peter and Paul. The first thing you see are giant mountains surrounding the city, cutting it off from the rest of the world. These mountains are in fact volcanoes. In this far eastern part of Russia, there are more than 300 volcanoes, including 29 active ones. These volcanoes stop any roads from reaching Petropavlovsk. The city depends on flights and boats to import supplies. You turn away from the volcanoes to stare out at the blue, shimmering ocean. The water looks nice, so you head down to the beach where a crowd of sea lions are sunbathing along the sand. Petropavlovsk is home to incredibly diverse wildlife. Just off the shore, you can see a whale fin poking out of the water. You explore the city's diverse landscape. You go to one of the city's ski resorts and spend the day on the slopes. Then you hike up a rocky path to the base of one of the city's many volcanoes. Finally, it's time to relax on a boat tour around the island to see the city's famous Three Brothers rock formation. Feeling inspired, you travel to another volcanic land, Chile's Easter Island. The island doesn't have a harbor and only one airline flies to the remote land, so you travel an entire day to Santiago, Chile. Then you climb aboard a small plane to fly to Easter Island. You walk among the high cliffs of the barren island and come across its famous monuments. These are giant, mysterious statues of human heads. They're called moai and were carved by the local people around 800 years ago. You inspect the earth beneath your feet. It looks and feels very dry. Easter Island consists of 3 ancient volcanoes. The volcanic soil makes it very difficult to grow crops or vegetation. Some of the city's trees were cleared hundreds of years ago to make way for the stone monuments, giving the island the empty look it has today. You embark on a boat ride 1,100 miles west from Easter Island. You reach a small green land floating in the Pacific Ocean. This is Pitcairn Island. You might recall that this place played a major role in the mutiny on the Bounty. You come down from the boat and begin your journey to reach Adamstown, the center of the island where its 43 inhabitants live. To reach Adamstown, you hike the Hill of Difficulty, a steep and rocky 200-foot climb to the top of the island. Now that you've finally made it here, you can explore the diverse and unique nature of the land. Pitcairn Island is home to the largest marine reserve in the world. You take a snorkeling trip and swim alongside all kinds of exotic fish. You explore vibrant coral reefs and even catch sight of a rare humpback whale. Dreaming of the great days of the old Wild West, you decide to travel to Supai, Arizona. To get to this Native American settlement and fragment of the past, you drive along America's famous Route 66. You stop, seemingly in the middle of nowhere with only desert land as far as the eye can see. Then you follow an 8-mile walking trail to reach Supai. You hike down into the Grand Canyon, almost 3,000 feet deep. You come across a stunning waterfall spilling over the cliffs of the canyon. This is Havasu Falls, a popular tourist spot, famous for its vivid blue-green water. After a further mile's hike, you finally reach Supai. Over 200 members of the Havasupai Indian tribe reside in the small town. It's often referred to as the most remote town in the United States. To your left, you see several mules making their way across town with packages on their backs. Because no roads lead to this small settlement, mail is delivered by a mule train. Without it, it would take the average mail carrier a 16-hour hike to complete this route. You walk around the area and come across many more towering blue waterfalls. The untouched nature and great views of the Grand Canyon make the long hike worthwhile. After a beautiful sunset, nighttime falls, and there are no lights for miles. The land is lit up by the countless stars shining overhead. Monday morning. The alarm is ringing cheerfully, and you vaguely remember you've already hit the snooze button, maybe not even once. You force your eyes open into narrow slits and look through the haze at the clock. 5:30. 5:30? You leap out of bed, sleep driven from your brain with an electric jolt. Work starts at 9, and you'll definitely be late already, but you may yet make it before lunch if you hurry. The kids are still asleep, of course, all 6 of them. Rushing through the house but trying to be as quiet as possible, you put on the first clothes you take out of the wardrobe and walk out of the apartment. On the elevator landing, there's already a crowd of sleepy people. Even 8 cabins aren't nearly enough to accommodate everyone in the morning. You take your place at the end of the line and wait. 2 elevators arrive, half full already, taking in about a quarter of the people on the landing. It takes another 10 minutes or so for you to finally cram into a cabin and start moving down from the 42nd floor. You feel bad for those living below. They have to wait even longer. It's 6 a.m. when you leave the apartment building and join the rushing crowd outside. As usual for this time of day, there's a huge traffic jam on the road nearby. The crowd of pedestrians is too big, so you have to walk slowly. In about an hour, you get to the subway and stand in line to get inside. It'll take another 40 minutes or so. Still faster than walking all the way to the office or driving. Underground, you have to wait for your turn to hop inside the train. They come every 5 minutes, but there are so many people that even cramming doesn't help. You only manage to get on after another 20 minutes. The doors catching the hem of your jacket. You stand flat against the doors, pushed into them by the press of the people. At the next stop, you have to get off the train to let others out. But when you try to get back, you're pushed by the crowd waiting to hop on and miss your place. Come on! The doors close and you wait another 5 minutes, pressed from all sides by anxious commuters. When the train arrives, you work your elbows urgently to get inside. Got it. You prepare for a long ride ahead. There's a similar ordeal awaiting at the next 4 stops. When you finally get to your station, you're already exhausted. It's 9:20, you're late as expected, and there's still some way to go. A crowd of late runners like you is even larger in the city center, so you take a deep breath and dive in. People are going different ways, so you have to push through, which makes the going painfully slow. If the streets were not so busy, it would take you no more than 15 minutes to get to the place. But in this mess, you spend an entire hour brawling your way. At last, at 10:30, you're at the entrance of your building, Demos Inc. Despite it being one of the biggest office buildings in the city, there's a line to use the 6 elevators as well. You roll your eyes and set to wait another half hour just to get to your floor already. Wow, you're in the cabin. What a relief! You press the button with number 33 on it and wait. Again. It's 11:03 a.m. You've been awake for almost 6 hours, and yet you've only just arrived at your workplace. Your colleagues are zooming around the floor like ants, and you carefully make your way to your cubicle. At least it's near a window, and you have a great view over the town. You look outside and see the familiar picture. Rows upon neat rows of skyscrapers, most of them apartment buildings combined with offices. It's been over 50 years since the anomaly happened. No one knows where it started exactly, but people began having quadruplets and even quintuplets much more often than usual. And strangely, it seemed to only affect this city and its suburbs. In the first decade, some decided it was something in the air or water of the town and moved to other places. But it turned out everyone who was born here was affected already. Even those who moved to other countries later reported to have up to jaw-dropping 10 children all at once. And not everyone wanted or even was able to leave town, so something had to be done. That's how Demos Incorporated appeared. Its mission was to both help the city adapt to the new circumstances and investigate the cause of such a birth anomaly. And the measures taken were drastic but efficient. First of all, the corporation invested into real estate development. Bigger families needed more space to live comfortably, so new apartment blocks were built with more rooms and more spacious interiors overall. People were offered to sell their old apartments and houses in favor of newer places to live, and most of them gladly agreed. There was a downside too, though. Those who didn't want to move soon found themselves surrounded by huge construction sites. Eventually, they couldn't stand the noise and dust and agreed to sell their dwellings. The whole city started transforming. Old buildings got demolished to make way for new, taller, and bigger ones. Roads were broadened for transport to move more freely. New businesses were opened to give jobs and services to thousands of new citizens. But that wasn't enough. Population growth was more rapid than city development. Thousands left, but millions stayed. The initiative to restrict birth was met with a massive civil protest and discarded. As a result, even with hundreds of skyscrapers, the city is terribly overpopulated. Its area has grown massively since the anomaly began, and now it's the largest city in the world, not only by population, but by area too. Working conditions have deteriorated as well. More and more people look for jobs that can be carried out from home because of incredible traffic jams. Others have found work in their own or neighboring apartment buildings. Yet others still, like you, are not so lucky. They have to wake up early in the morning just to get to work on time. It's not uncommon to have an alarm set for 4 a.m. At this time, it's relatively crowdless in the streets. Naturally though, nursing and tutoring have been booming all this time. Since every parent now has at least 4 kids to raise, they accept any help they can get. Single people earn good money babysitting for their neighbors and tutoring their kids of school age. Schools, by the way, have been built at an astonishing pace, yet still there aren't nearly enough of them to accommodate all the children. Parents register years ahead of time for their offspring to get elementary education. Entertainment has been hit hard as well. Numerous new restaurants, cinemas, theme parks have been opened within and beyond the city limits. But ordering a table or buying a ticket is a game of incredible chance. With the city population grown tenfold, you must plan your weekend at least 2 weeks ahead. And even going to the countryside for a picnic is an adventure in itself. First, you have to leave the city. Then, find a spot where there won't be crowds of nature-goers like you. And after you're done, it's a trip back home. Normally, people prepare for at least a 2-day stay in the country, because it takes 3 hours just to leave the town and another 3 to get back. Lost in thoughts about all this, you don't notice your colleague approaching you and start when she touches your shoulder. She smiles and apologizes, and you notice a folder in her hand. She traces your gaze and puts the folder on your table, opening it. Inside, you see some documents, but don't understand what they're about. Your colleague points to several paragraphs, and you have to read them 3 times before realization dawns on you like a hammer. It's a set of reports from several cities across the country. There are lots of numbers you can barely understand, but all of the papers have one thing in common. They end with a request for Demos Inc. to open a branch in their respective towns. You count the reports. 17. 17 new cities have just experienced the same baby boom you've been trying to cope with for half a century. The year is 2160. The place, the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Japan. The ocean seems calm, at least the surface does. The ocean floor is cracking right now. Boom! The earth opens up, magma shoots out. The crack in the ocean floor triggers an earthquake, and a massive amount of energy shoots into the ocean. And now for gravity to get involved. It pulls the water down and makes it move faster and faster. It's a tsunami. A wave as high as a skyscraper plows toward Tokyo at 500 miles per hour. That's millions of tons of water. It would be awesome to take a picture of it, but there's no time to admire the power of nature. The tsunami's about to hit Tokyo Bay. The tsunami smashes ashore and starts attacking the largest structure on the planet, the Tokyo Pyramid Metropolis. It's 6,600 feet tall. That's 5 times the height of the Empire State Building. Imagine if the entire population of Denver, Colorado lived and worked in one building. The Tokyo Pyramid Metropolis, TPM, can handle 750,000 people at a time. Incredibly, the structure withstands the impact, and most of the tsunami's energy seems to have just disappeared. This time, engineering stands up to nature. TPM was built by the Shimizu Corporation, which was founded in 1804. The pyramid is the most stable structure around. If you don't believe me, go to Egypt and see the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's lasted 4,500 years and it's still going strong. The TPM is built on water and consists of 204 individual pyramids. They look like bunches of grapes stacked on top of each other, 8 tiers in all. Only in this case, each grape is the size of a Vegas casino. The TPM's actually hollow. That's how it defends itself against typhoons and tsunamis. It doesn't meet the wind and waves head-on, but lets all that energy just pass right through it. Robots and autonomous control systems run this place. It runs on solar, wind, and wave energy. The pyramids are connected by passages, all in all about 85 miles worth. They connect everything and are maintained by AI that always finds you the fastest way to get from Pyramid A to Pyramid B. The TPA's obviously the city of the future, but human tech isn't quite ready for it just yet. Originally, engineers decided to install the pyramid on 36 columns, all dug into the ocean bed. If you build a pyramid that size out of steel and concrete, you'd be looking at 50 million tons of load press in on itself. The TPM would have collapsed under its own weight and imploded into the ocean. They needed something 1,000 times lighter than concrete and stronger than steel. So, what's this futuristic material? Look at this old guy. It's the first car on the planet with an internal combustion engine. It hit the road in 1885. And this is the first artificial satellite that humans launched into space. It only took an evolutionary blip to go from the first horseless carriage to our first flight into space. That TPM's not looking so ridiculous. Hey, we can do anything. The solution is carbon, and it's everywhere. It's the rod in your pencil, and the diamond in your crown or ring or industrial drill. But we don't just need ordinary carbon, we need graphene. It's a type of carbon we can make nanotubes out of. They're thinner than a human hair, but 400 times stronger than steel. And most importantly, they're light. Nanotubes aren't affected by chemicals, oxygen, or water. Perfect for the TPM. That's just a fancy way of saying the thing's not going to rust. Shimizu has plans for a power station on the moon, an underwater city, transforming the Sahara Desert into a huge oasis, and much more, but they aren't the only ones changing the planet. The Netherlands is the size of 2 New Jerseys, and about 30% of it is below sea level. To protect their country from water, the Dutch built dams, lots of them. But that's just defense. In 1986, they decided to go on offense and take back some of the land from the sea. The first dam was 19 miles long. It basically turned a bay into a lake. The second dam sealed the deal. After 42 years of work, the Netherlands got itself a whole new province larger than Los Angeles. Humans have done the same thing all over the world, like in Hong Kong, the Philippines, Italy. Hey, take that, water! What about building stuff on land that's already land? Before NASA's missions to Mars, the most expensive project in history was the construction of the interstate highway system in the United States. It took about 35 years to finish. In today's money, it cost about $530 billion. All that cash bought 46,000 miles of road. That's almost 2 times around the globe. There are over 270 million vehicles in the US, more than Japan, Brazil, India, and Germany combined. But in terms of sheer effort, the roads of Rome were way more impressive. Over 2,000 years before the first automobile, the Romans built a huge network of roads, 50,000 miles long. They connected Ireland with Egypt and Turkey with Spain. The roads were pretty safe, and travelers could stay in hotels, dine in cafes, or mail a letter at the nearest post office. Only about 30% of the Earth's surface is land. The world's oceans, rivers, and lakes are full of life, and it seemed like a ridiculous task to catalog everything living in there. but 2,700 scientists from 80 countries decided to team up to do it. The cost? $650 million. Those scientists spent 10 years searching for old and new species. It was one of the biggest science projects ever attempted. They even discovered about 6,000 new species of fish, squid, and algae. The Great Wall of China is huge. 13,000 miles of walls, natural barriers, and trenches. That's about 2 times the distance from Alaska to Australia. They built it over a period of 2,000 years, with no trucks, bulldozers, electricity, just raw people power. Modern China's not exactly dropping the ball. In 2 years, China used more concrete for construction than the US ever did. I mean ever. Roads, cities, airports, everything there is huge. The Three Gorges Dam is definitely the new Great Wall of China. Over 7,600 feet long and 600 feet high. You're looking at 3 times more concrete and steel than the Hoover Dam. It's the largest concrete structure in the world and cost about $37 billion. More than 1 million people had to pack up and move to make way for it. Switzerland has the longest and deepest railway tunnel on the planet. Under the snowy Alps, builders dug 35 miles of tunnels. Every day, 200 freight and passenger trains pass through it. The amount of rock they took out to make the tunnel is about the same as 5 Great Pyramids. The whole thing cost about $12 billion. Egypt's one of the oldest nations on the planet, but now they're building one of the newest cities. It's going to be about the size of Singapore and filled with 6 million lucky people. There's going to be apartments, government buildings, entertainment, even an opera house. Oh, and a park that'll make Central Park look like someone's backyard. When it's finished, it'll be Egypt's new capital. So why bother? Well, by 2050, Cairo's going to have about 40 million people in it. Looks like they'll need more than one new city. The first flights to the moon cost about $280 billion in today's money. But SpaceX isn't letting price get in its way. The company plans to build a colony on Mars with a population of 1 million by 2050. They claim that once the program starts, you'll be able to buy a ticket to Mars for as little as $100,000. But the biggest science project ever is definitely the International Space Station. It weighs as much as 2 Boeing 747s and zooms through space at the speed of 17,500 miles per hour. That pencils out to be 5 miles per second. The station orbits the Earth 16 times per day, and it doesn't come cheap. Luckily, a whole bunch of countries share the bill, but it's definitely the most expensive room service anywhere in the galaxy. It costs $10,000 to deliver a bottle of water from Earth to the space station. Hey, at that price, I think it's important to ask, sparkling or still?
It used to be one of the most prosperous ancient cities. It had features that were unthinkable for other locations during the Bronze Age, like water systems and intricate architecture. Yet somehow, it didn't become famous. What's even more mysterious is that at some point, it became abandoned. Mohenjo-Daro was a thriving city during the Indus Valley Civilization in the Bronze Age. It had a population of at least 40,000 people. It was close to Mesopotamia and Egypt in terms of social, cultural, and economic features. Despite this, it's lesser known than the more famous cities in these regions, like Babylon or Memphis. It was eventually abandoned by 1700 BCE, and the reason for its abandonment and the fate of its inhabitants remains unknown to this day. In 1911, archaeologists discovered the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro after hearing reports of some unusual buildings in the area. However, local Indian authorities dismissed them as not having any historical significance, and the site remained untouched for several more years. It wasn't until 1922 that a local specialist believed he had found a buried local monument at the site. This led to large-scale excavations and the eventual naming of Mohenjo-Daro as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980. The remains uncovered showed us that Mohenjo-Daro was an incredibly modern city for that time. it is considered the best preserved ruin of the Indus Valley. One of Mohenjo-Daro's most impressive features was its advanced sanitation system. Unlike in Egypt and Mesopotamia, where such appliances were only for the rich, Mohenjo-Daro had hidden toilets and covered drains throughout the city. Excavations have uncovered over 700 wells, as well as private baths and a large communal bath. Remarkably, even private homes had toilets, and waste was efficiently disposed of through a city-wide sewage system. The people of Mohenjo-Daro were highly aware of their surroundings. As the city was located near the Indus River, they built a strong defense against floods by using clever drainage systems. Over the centuries, they produced beautifully crafted pottery, jewelry, figurines, and other items that were traded as far as Mesopotamia and present-day Oman. Archaeologists have observed the use of standardized building materials in this ancient city, even though they didn't have the necessary machines back in the day. Interestingly, all the bricks were nearly the same. This shows great attention to detail in the city's design, as using consistent bricks creates an elegant look in the spaces within the city. People living in this area used the Indus Valley script to communicate with each other. This mysterious alphabet might be the key to unlocking more secrets from Mohenjo-Daro. It was a language that used symbols instead of letters and had over 400 signs. Problem is, we're still trying to figure it out. The mystery of what caused the end of the Indus civilization and Mohenjo-Daro remains unsolved. Some archaeologists suggest that the Indus River might have changed its direction. This could have led to problems in cultivating food if there was suddenly too much water in the city. However, there is no evidence that flooding destroyed the area, or that it was completely abandoned at once. A change in the river's course couldn't have been enough for the entire Indus civilization to disappear. Mohenjo-Daro isn't the only lost town from Eastern civilizations. Ross Island, for instance, was once known as the Paris of the East due to its stunning architecture and gardens. However, the island is now a shadow of its former self, with the buildings being largely overtaken by tree roots and vines. Located 1.8 miles off the coast of Port Blair, India, the small territory was initially used as a jail, but later became a luxurious resort for its administrators. After the complex was closed in 1937, an earthquake further damaged the island and it became uninhabitable. Today, the island is managed by the Indian government and attracts tourists interested in exploring abandoned towns. Another lost city tells the story of why Kolmanskop, a ghost town located in Namibia, is still home to remnants of German architecture. Once a luxury destination in the early 1900s, it was settled by German workers looking for diamonds. The city boasted amenities such as a ballroom, a hospital, and even a bowling alley. However, its popularity began to wane in the late 1910s when another diamond-rich location was discovered nearby. Most of the inhabitants left in search of better fortunes, leaving the buildings behind. The hot climate and low humidity have preserved the structures over time, and tourists can now visit this desert ghost town from the nearby town of Lüderitz. Hashima Island is a reminder of how nature reclaims its land when humans leave. It was famously featured in a James Bond movie due to its eerie atmosphere. The island was initially opened in 1881 for undersea coal mining, and the population of the island grew to a peak of 5,000 people in 1959. Unfortunately, the mines closed in the 1970s, and people began to slowly leave the island, resulting in complete abandonment in a period of 3 months. Now, the island is a popular tourist destination as visitors explore deserted homes, swimming pools, stores, and factories. The discovery of gold in a creek near Bannack, Montana in 1862 caused the population of the town to grow from a few hundred to thousands in a few short years. Unfortunately, This rapid expansion was followed by a sharp decline because more gold had been found in other areas nearby. As a result, Bannack was eventually made the first territorial capital of Montana, but only held the title for less than a year before being replaced by Virginia City. The state of Montana later acquired most of the land in 1954 and made it Bannack State Park. The ancient city of Petra, located in Jordan, was fascinating because it was half built, half carved into the rock and surrounded by mountains. It's a popular tourist destination these days, but at one point it was abandoned too. Many things led to its decline, like bad government and changes in how people traded. Natural disasters didn't help either. This city saw a lot of earthquakes ruining its constructions and damaging its water systems. Since people had no place to live, no water, and nothing to sell to make money, they eventually moved on to better locations. The city remained hidden for almost 500 years until it was rediscovered in the 1800s. Most of the tourists going to Santorini have no idea that the island is home to the remains of one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history, the Thera eruption. This catastrophic event took place some 3,600 years ago. Akrotiri, one of the towns on the island at the time, was buried under the eruption. Unlike Pompeii, however, no traces of people and civilization were found, suggesting that people had enough time to flee the volcano before it blew up. Henry Ford, the renowned American industrialist, created the Ford Motor Company in 1903. In 1927, he began working on a grand project, Fordlandia. His goal was to construct a massive rubber plantation near the Tapajos River in Brazil to provide a steady supply of rubber for his car tires and hoses. His idea was to make the town a paradise, with swimming pools, golf courses, bungalows, and even weekly square dancing sessions. Unfortunately, the trees in the plantation soon became infected with leaf fungus, making the project a failure. Ford invested a whopping $20 million in this endeavor, yet it was unable to produce the necessary rubber. So Ford sold the land to the Brazilian government in 1945. The buildings that were built are still there, although they have been taken over by nature and are visited by tourists. Sky City is a residential area located in the Asian Hangzhou suburbs. It was built in 2007 and was intended to be a replica of Paris. The city even has its own Eiffel Tower, as well as copies of other iconic Parisian landmarks like the Opera Garnier and the Champs-Élysées. It also has luxurious villas and apartments, a man-made lake, gardens, and parks. Despite its grand plans, it's almost completely abandoned. Nobody wants to live here because it's really expensive. It is, however, a pretty nice location for locals to take pictures, in case they want to trick people into thinking that they just landed in the French capital.
Imagine that it's the year 2025, and our planet has completely changed. Rising sea levels, extreme weather, and the ocean becoming more and more acidic are just some of the problems people have been dealing with for years. But in one of the world's largest coastal cities, the situation has become too serious. It was a sunny day in June when a massive earthquake shook the city to its core. The ground beneath people's feet heaved and shook, and buildings swayed dangerously. People ran through the streets in panic, trying to find safety. But as soon as the ground settled, the inhabitants of the city realized the real danger. A wall of water, almost 100 feet high, was rushing toward the city, propelled by the force of the earthquake. The tsunami hit the city with unimaginable force. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out, and thousands of people lost their lives. But here's where things get interesting. In the aftermath of the disaster, the city's authorities realized that they couldn't just rebuild the city as it was before. They needed to be better prepared for the next potential disaster. And so they came up with an incredibly ambitious project to build an underwater city. The goal was to create a self-sufficient, sustainable city beneath the ocean's surface that could withstand any natural disaster. The underwater city would be powered by renewable energy, using tidal power and underwater solar panels. It would be designed to withstand extreme weather and would have its own emergency response systems. The project attracted some of the world's top scientists, engineers, and architects. They worked tirelessly to design the city and carefully considered every aspect of the project. The underwater city would have everything that a typical city had, from schools and hospitals to stores and restaurants. There would be underwater farms where fish and other marine creatures could grow. The city would even have its transportation system, advanced submarines, and underwater tunnels connecting different parts of the city. The project became a shining beacon of hope for people. It showed that even in the face of disaster, we could come together to create something amazing. But as time went on, the project no longer seemed so perfect. The cost of the project turned out to be higher than planned. There were also concerns about how long such a project would exist. After all, the ocean is very unpredictable. And still, the team of scientists and engineers never gave up. After years of trial and error, they finally created the perfect underwater city, a marvel of engineering, a self-contained ecosystem that could sustain people indefinitely. The buildings were constructed from a material that could withstand the immense pressure at the bottom of the ocean, and the city itself was powered by a network of advanced hydroelectric turbines. It wasn't long before the first wave of colonists arrived at the underwater city. There were different people in this group, and each of them had their own reasons for choosing to live in this new world beneath the waves. Some were adventurers seeking a new world to explore, while others were hoping to escape natural disasters raging on dry land. But despite their differences, all these people shared a common goal: to build a new society, one that was in harmony with the natural world. The underwater city flourished, and new discoveries were made every day. The colonists developed new technologies and ways to tame the power of the ocean. They learned to farm the sea and started cultivating underwater gardens that provided them with a steady food supply. But living underwater was challenging. People felt isolated and even claustrophobic. The situation came to a head when a group of activists started to protest against the city's expansion plans. They argued that the underwater city was a threat to the environment it was meant to protect, and that the colonists should focus on reducing their impact on the delicate underwater life. The protests sparked a heated debate among the colonists. Some of them argued that the survival of the city depended on its growth and expansion. Others claimed that the city needed to prioritize the protection of the environment above all else. In the end, a compromise was reached. The city would continue to expand, but the main priority would be sustainability and a responsible attitude to nature. The colonists would do their best to reduce their impact on the environment by using new technologies and following strict conservation rules. And they would also remember the importance of protecting the ocean and its fragile ecosystem. Years went by, and the underwater city continued to thrive. New generations of colonists were born, and they grew up in a world entirely different from the one their ancestors had known. They never saw the world on the surface, but appreciated the beauty and complexity of the underwater world they called home. And as the years passed, the city became a symbol of hope for a world struggling with the devastating effects of climate change. It showed that despite all difficulties, people could come together to create a better world. It is a reminder that the future is not set in stone, and that we can build it sustainably and in harmony with the natural world.
So, you've just finished your sightseeing tour of Edinburgh, Scotland, or Scotland. It lasted just under an hour, and you're hungry for more. You ask your guide if there's anything else to see, and they start talking about a mysterious underground city. You ask how long it takes to get there, and you're shocked by the guide's answer. You're standing on it. It's right under your feet. South Bridge? But you were just there and didn't notice a giant arrow pointing down. So this is where the mystery starts. The story begins in the mid-1700s. The Scottish capital wasn't as big as it is today. Only 60,000 people lived around Edinburgh Castle. All of them were packed inside medieval walls, and they say today's cities are overpopulated. Get a load of the living conditions back then. The buildings were tall, so there was little natural light. Some houses had 14 stories. Cows walked the narrow winding streets and left stock. Things were so bad that the famous English writer Daniel Defoe noted, "I believe that in no city in the world so many people have so little room." Yep, that's the guy who wrote Robinson Crusoe. Well, something just had to be done. The solution was to build 2 long bridges to the north and to the south of the city. The names they gave the bridges were more descriptive than colorful. The bridge to the north was completed first. In 1785, construction on the second bridge got underway. It was going to connect the main pedestrian street in the north with the university buildings in the south of Edinburgh. But don't think of this construction as a modern bridge over a river. It was more of a viaduct, a type of bridge that connects 2 hills across a valley. The word viaduct comes from Latin, as Romans were pioneers in building these structures. Their capital was built on 7 hills. And just to be copycats, Edinburgh also straddled 7 major hills. Only 2 are visible today because the city has been built up. Now, back in the 18th century, the construction of the South Bridge was a remarkable feat of engineering. It took the builders only 3 years to complete it. 19 stone arches spanned a chasm that was 31 feet at its deepest point, and the length over 1,000 feet. Impressive, even for today's standards. But what does a 2.5 centuries old viaduct have to do with an underground city? Well, it is the city. You see, they designed Southbridge to be hollow on the inside. As you walk along this street today, there is actually a huge human-made cave beneath your feet. The popular name for this set of chambers is the Edinburgh Vaults. But what was the purpose of this space? And is there something or someone there now? Well, let's take it one step at a time. The builder's original intention was for these vaults to serve as merchant shops. At first, it worked out fine. Merchants used a total of 120 vaults as shops and warehouses. There were workshops, cobblers, and taverns. But as time went by, a major design flaw came to light. The stone was leaking, and the vaults were damp all the time. There was even flooding. The builders forgot to waterproof the structure. The merchants feared the water would damage their precious goods. After just a couple of years, the first tenants started moving out. Once legal trade moved away from the vaults, the city's poor moved in. And not only them, but all sorts of shady characters. Historians don't know much about this period, since there are no written records. But even the squatters had to leave soon. If you couldn't do business in these vaults, how could you live in them? It was damp and cold, and there was no ventilation, sanitation, or natural light. It really stunk. Every real estate agent's worst nightmare. Just 30 years after their completion, the Southbridge vaults were abandoned once and for all. But at a street level, business was as usual. The officials decided to fill the vaults with rubble for security purposes. Buried and forgotten, the memory of a once teeming merchant quarter of Edinburgh slowly faded from people's minds. Now, this is where the story gets a bit weird. During the 1980s, a Scottish rugby player accidentally found a tunnel leading into the vaults. The athlete didn't waste any time and started excavating the vaults with the help of his son. Several tons of rubble, and a decade later, the Southbridge vaults have been restored to their former glory, so to speak. They were again dark and damp, as they were back in the 1700s. There were many interesting finds in this underground city. The vaults were littered with oyster shells, which were the standard diet for a working-class resident of Edinburgh at the time. Other finds, such as shoes and empty bottles, suggested that people actually lived in these claustrophobic vaults. Think of this the next time you see someone trying to rent their garage as an apartment. So, your guide was right. There really is a hidden city under the streets of Edinburgh. Well, at least one street. You have now gone down from the main pedestrian street into Cowgate. You look up and there it is, the only visible arch of the once impressive bridge. You are now searching online to book a tour of the vaults. You just have to see this place with your own eyes. But the Scottish capital isn't the only city with a mysterious underground. The historic region of Cappadocia in central Turkey hides no less than 36 cities beneath the ground. The biggest and the most impressive one wasn't discovered until 1963. It was built during the Byzantine era to protect the local population from invaders. We have similar structures made out of concrete in our cities, but the level of the Turkish underground city is really impressive. There are several levels, like in a multi-story car garage. The caves and tunnels lie 197 feet underground. That's 2/3 of the Statue of Liberty's height. The city could house 20,000 people at any given time, complete with livestock and food. The smell. Anyway, 20,000 is the average attendance at Major League Soccer matches today. You might want to add a field trip to one of these places the next time you go to Turkey. Most of these cities in Cappadocia can be found in rural areas. Makes sense, right? After all, they were dug out as hiding places. But in Europe, there is one city whose underground labyrinth resembles the vaults of Edinburgh. You've probably heard of Pilsen in the Czech Republic. But hold on a second, this isn't going to be a story of the most famous local product. Something brewed, perhaps? It's the story of a medieval city that survived underneath the streets of Pilsen. Water wells, cellars, and passageways stretched for more than 12 miles. Merchants and craftspeople used Pilsen's historical underground for storage. Water, food, ice, you name it. The waterworks are pretty impressive. Historians estimate that 360 wells are located under Pilsen's historical town center. In times of instability, the passageways served as safe havens for the locals. They definitely didn't go thirsty down there. Today, most tourists visit these mysterious underground cities. But in Canada, there's one where people live and work. The construction of Montreal's underground city began in 1962. The initial idea was to shelter traffic. That's a nice way to say that city officials were building a metro station. The idea caught on, and the project expanded. Now, it's a real-life urban maze hidden under the downtown area. Need a place to stay? There are hotels down there. Want to grab a bite? Step into one of the underground restaurants. Multiple shops, a library, cinemas, the list is long. There are even residential complexes. But how can people live under the ground? Simple. Although the city itself lies beneath the earth, the access points are at ground level. You can enter the 20-mile-long tunnel network at more than 120 places. Oh, that's another place down under. Oops, sorry, Australia.
It's 10 p.m. You suddenly feel hungry and go to the fridge, but there's nothing inside. You decide to hop to the nearest supermarket. There, you find the snack you want and pay by card. On the way home, you wonder, was it this easy to get food in the city a century ago? One of the streetlights flickers and goes out. You are now in the dark. Feeling scared? Now you know how people felt after sundown in the pre-electricity era. We are so used to power that we forget that it isn't even a century old. In 1925, only half of all US homes had electricity. Without it, nothing would be possible today. The light in your room, the refrigerator, store signs, and credit card. They all need electricity to run. So, how did people live without it? Did our cities lie in complete darkness? Not quite. The history of illuminating our homes and streets is thousands of years old. Recently, 2022, archaeologists discovered the oldest intact oil lamp. They estimated it was 2,300 years old. There is evidence of workshops that produced these lamps on a massive scale. Italian scientists have discovered similar lamps in Modena. This city was the center of oil lamp production in the Roman Empire. The workshops were so widespread that they even had different brands: Fortis, Feetasbai, and Strobili. Some brands were in high demand, so other manufacturers copied their makers' marks. And you thought that fakes were a modern problem. These oil lamps were simple in design. High-end lamps were made from bronze and other metals, but the most common material was clay. People would pour oil through the central hole and then burn a wick inside the nozzle area. The wick was mostly linen. But oil lamps were small in size and were used indoors. There was no way to light a whole street with them. The alternative was, you've guessed it, candles. Humans still use candles today. Your grandma probably has a candle and a box of matches hidden in a drawer somewhere, just in case of a power outage. Humans have been making candles for 5,000 years. When you think of a candle, you think of beeswax. But the range of candle materials is pretty wide. In the Middle Ages, only the rich could afford beeswax candles. The rest of the population had to be happy with tallow. By modern standards, candles have terrible energy efficiency. Do you remember the time when you first saw a candle and tried to touch it? Ouch! You never got that idea again, did you? Candles use a lot of energy to generate heat. That's why they are far from ideal light sources, and the light they emit is not the kind we need. It's infrared. Humans cannot see this sort of light. The numbers are staggering. Only 1% of candlelight is visible to us humans. Modern light bulbs are way more efficient. They shine 80 times brighter than candles. In such dim conditions, our ancestors had to be imaginative. For instance, they covered artwork with a thin layer of gold. This technique was called gold leaf. Artists didn't do this to make their artwork look luxurious. They wanted their paintings to glow in the candlelight. And they had another ally in the struggle against darkness: natural light. Have you ever wondered why old churches have tall, elongated windows? Their main function was to let sunlight inside. After all, these structures were huge. There was no other way to illuminate them. Just take Notre Dame, Paris, France, as an example. It covers an area 4 times as large as a hockey rink. And the building was 211 feet high. That's about half as tall as the Great Pyramid of Giza, so it made sense to build large windows. In homes, mirrors had the same effect as windows. They would reflect natural light around the house. Before electricity, our homes were packed with mirrors. And how many do we have today? One in the bathroom and maybe one in the hallway. That's because we no longer need them to reflect light. All those mirrors have been replaced with a simple flip of a light switch. Today, interior designers advise people to remove mirrors from their bedrooms for better sleep. Talk about a plot twist. But what about buildings that people visited at nighttime, such as theaters and opera houses? The solution was surprisingly low-tech. Candles. Like, thousands of them. Builders mounted them on large chandeliers. But there was a problem. All those candles created heat and would burn for an hour or so max. Playwrights and composers had to add pauses, so staff would have time to replace the candles. Have you ever shattered a light bulb by accident? Not a pleasant experience, but luckily, you can clean the glass with a broom in seconds. Before electricity, such clumsiness cost people their lives. Knocking over a candle could start a major fire. And there was another danger. Ladies wore long dresses that presented a fire hazard. Our ancestors were literally playing with fire. And this is all indoors. Outside the house, you would have to carry a flaming torch, or hope that the sky wasn't cloudy, so you could navigate by moonlight. And one smart American decided not to go out at night at all. Benjamin Franklin went to bed at 10 p.m. and got up at 5 a.m. But over in London, going out at night created a new business. Link boys carried torches for Victorians. These youngsters would wait outside inns for patrons to come out after dark and offer their services. And they did their job in times of thick fog as well. That's the English weather for you. Before electricity, it was dangerous to go outside after sundown. But this was about to change in 1807. That's when a German engineer, Frederick Windsor, lit a street in London using gas lamps. It was finally becoming possible to go out at night and feel safe. Now these gas lamps weren't easy to operate. At dusk, a lamplighter had to carry a torch to turn them on, so to say. And then, at dawn, they had to do another round to put out the flames. That sounds like some good cardio. And it was. During their entire career, a lamplighter could easily walk 150,000 miles in total. And then came electricity. In the 1870s, Thomas Edison was the first to produce commercial light bulbs. A city in the west of Romania, Timisoara, became the first place in Europe to have electric streetlights. Half of the homes in Britain had electric power by the end of the 1930s. The age of electricity had begun, but there was still room for improvement. At the time, the most common type of light bulb was incandescent. This means that the light bulb has a filament inside that produces light when heated by electric power. This type of bulb is similar to a candle. It produces heat rather than light, and the ratio will stun you. 95% of the electricity that flows through the light bulb is converted into heat. Yes, you've heard it right. Only 5% of energy is used for creating actual light. Despite this, electric power has changed the way we live. In the year 1800, only 2% of the world's population lived in cities. And there is a good reason for this. Cities were dark places, illuminated only by candles and oil lamps. There was no street lighting. After electricity became a thing, the numbers turned. According to the World Bank, more than half of the world's population, 56%, lives in cities today. And our urban settlements look a lot different than they did just a century and a half ago. They now shine bright on satellite images. From space, Las Vegas is the city that shines the brightest at night. But the story of illumination is far from over. In 2006, Ann Arbor, Michigan, US, became the first metropolitan area to use LED for street lighting. It is short for light-emitting diodes. This new type of lighting uses at least 75% less energy than the light bulb perfected by Edison in the 1800s. And they last longer too, up to 25 times.
If you've ever wondered what it feels like to walk on diamonds, head straight to the town of Nördlingen in Germany. It seems like a typical fairy tale village with cute houses and red roofs, but its walls and streets are actually studded with over 72,000 diamonds. You'll need a microscope to see them, but they're definitely there. When the first people came to live here, somewhere around the 9th century CE, they were positive they were settling down in a volcanic crater. They didn't know the stone they were using for construction was embedded with millions of tiny diamonds, and the origins of the crater were out of this world. An asteroid slightly larger than half a mile in diameter hit our planet around 14.5 million years ago in what is now Bavaria and left a crater 16 miles wide. The bedrock was under such intense heat and pressure that the bubbles of carbon inside transformed into tiny diamonds at a concentration like nowhere else in the world. The locals didn't pay attention to their houses, built of what was left of that asteroid impact, shimmering on sunrise. Then, in the 1960s, 2 geologists arrived from the USA, studied the landscape from a distance, and noticed it didn't look exactly like a volcanic crater. After further research, they realized their theory that the crater was shaped from above and not from below proved right. They even had to change school books after the discovery, not to mislead the students. Once the word of the crater had spread, NASA got interested in it and sent their Apollo 14 and Apollo 16 astronauts to visit it to learn about what kind of rocks they'd find in space and which of them were worth bringing home. A moon rock that arrived with one of the missions is now on display at the local museum, and astronauts still visit the place. The locals, though, are so used to living among diamonds, they don't even find it special. The Australian town of Coober Pedy is known as the opal capital of the world and exists completely underground. The town even has the first 4-star underground hotel in the world. The reason people settled in this area was to work at an opal mine. Back in the day, the miners could hardly survive under the burning desert sun, so someone decided to put a tent directly into the mine. Then it turned into a home. Now, Coober Pedy has around 2,500 residents from different countries, about 30 shops, an opal gallery, museums, a bar, and other buildings, and is a popular tourist attraction. The town of Monowi, Nebraska in the USA has a mayor, a clerk, a treasurer, a librarian, a tavern keeper, and a bartender. Yet, the population is officially just 1. Elsie Eiler has been doing all those jobs, paying taxes to herself and voting herself for mayor since 2004. Back in the 1930s, Monowi had a population of 150 people, grocery shops, and restaurants. When farming conditions got worse, people started leaving family by family until it went down to 1 person. If you feel like saving some money on house construction, look up some property in the Spanish town of Centenil de las Bodegas. 3,000 residents live under and into the sides of the Cadiz Mountains and use them as natural walls and ceilings. The first settlers moved in here back in prehistoric times. The rocks keep the houses cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Neft Dashleri in Azerbaijan was built as an oil platform in 1940. directly in the Caspian Sea. Once they discovered rich oil deposits, it started growing and is now made up of a network of platforms with around 5,000 people working and living here. The town has apartments, bridges, a library, a community center, and even a movie theater. The Japanese village of Nagoro has an unofficial second name, the Scarecrow Village. The last children were born here over 20 years ago. It officially has less than 50 residents, but it feels complete thanks to 350 life-size human dolls. When a local lady came back here in 2000 to look after her aging father, she saw the empty streets, shops, and schools. To change that, she and her friends started making cute dolls to replace the residents. The entire town of Whittier, Alaska, lives under one roof of a 14-story building of a former barracks. That's around 220 people who live here all year round, plus all the shops, a police station, a post office, a hospital, and a church. The locals are mostly working in commercial fishing, recreation, and tourism, or for the state ferry and railroad. The idea behind having everyone and everything in one place is to save money on heating in the always cold climate and let the people do all their business inside. This way, they don't have to face the unbearably strong winds. There's a town in Svalbard, Norway called Longyearbyen, where the sun sets on October 25th and doesn't rise again for the next 4 months. When it rises again in spring, the locals gather on the step of an old hospital at 12:15 to welcome the sun and celebrate its return. Then, it doesn't set for over 4 months. It happens because of the way the Earth is tilted on its axis. The sun only rises and sets once each year at the North and South Poles. Longyearbyen is the northernmost town in the world, so it gets affected by that. Its residents occasionally see polar bears and reindeer in the streets and get around on snowmobiles. The Italian village of Viganella was built right at the bottom of a deep valley and on the wrong side of the mountains. They cast huge shadows and deprived the village of the sun for the entire winter. The locals used to live like that for centuries, until one engineer decided to build a large mirror high on the opposite slope of the mountain. It's operated by a computer and reflects light on the central square of Viganella for at least 6 hours a day during the darkest months. Santa Cruz del Islote in Colombia is one of the world's most crowded islands, with around 600 residents in a 2.5-acre area. Fishermen built this island on a coral platform over a century ago. They chose it because of its beautiful location and the absence of mosquitoes. The families of the original settlers were growing, and most of them never left the island. You'll only find people with 6 different last names living here. When the family needs extra space, they just add an extra floor to one of around 100 homes in town. Now it has a school, shops, a church, and 1 restaurant. There is no traffic, since the streets aren't wide enough for cars or trucks, and the distances are perfectly walkable. No one on the island locks their doors, because everyone knows each other, and there hasn't been a single crime. Another place where people don't lock their doors is the Shani Shingnapur village in India. In fact, local homes and even shops don't have front doors, keys, and locks, but locals never feel unsafe. Residents believe their village is under the protection of Lord Shani, who will punish anyone who tries to steal something. A legend says that around 300 years ago, after heavy rain and flooding, the locals found a huge rock. The same night, Lord Shani appeared in the dreams of the village head and promised to protect the village if they kept the rock in the village unsheltered. The deity would live on the rock and oversee the village. Once the first bank opened in the village, they added a glass entrance and a barely visible electromagnetic lock with a remote control to respect the tradition. If you're looking for the most relaxed place in the world, check out the Villages in Florida. You can't move here unless there is at least one person over 55 in your home. And you'd have to leave behind any family members under 19. The most popular means of transportation in the villages is a golf cart. There are all sorts of free fun activities for the residents, so it's far from boring.
Do you remember 2011? Well, play along with me. A diver is set to go deep into the waters of the Musi River, located in the heart of an Indonesian island. He is one among many who have been getting unbelievable artifacts from the bottom of the river. Little by little, divers and fishers discover a long-lost Sumatran civilization. Known as the Island of Gold, the kingdom of Srivijaya was most likely the closest to a real-life El Dorado there has ever been. However, it disappeared late in the 13th century, and until recently, researchers didn't even know the exact location of the kingdom. Picture a civilization built on a river, a true water world. According to the archaeologists that have been studying Srivijaya, houses, markets, and places of worship were built on wooden piles above the level of the water. Citizens moved around like modern-day Venetians in simple boats. Srivijaya was known to be a rich and important kingdom. It existed from the 7th to the 11th century CE. It was part of the Silk Road, and anyone traveling from east to west had to pass through the city. Their kings were smart and gained control of the Malacca Strait, which allowed the town to have total control over trading routes in the region. If anything, they sure were honoring the town's name. Srivijaya translates from Sanskrit into prosperous victor, or simply glorious. The kingdom was an important commercial outpost of ancient times. It was strategically located among the most influential commercial routes of the ancient world, which means its citizens became extremely rich. Ancient wealthy societies used to overly display their gold and precious metals. They would often use these metals as offerings to their deities, or they would use them to forge large statues and to make jewelry for kings and queens and decorations for their palaces. Srivijaya wasn't different. Local Indonesian divers who have been exploring the half-mile of the Musi River near the city of Palembang have found some evidence. So far, they've discovered a life-size statue of Buddha, jewelry studded with precious gems, temple bells, mirrors, golden jugs, and other items. No official archaeological excavations have been done in the area, so these artifacts are the first items of the Srivijayan Empire ever found. Sean Kinslett, a British maritime archaeologist who has reported on these discoveries, says he is truly surprised. For long, people have been speculating about the true wealth of Srivijaya, and it seems that the rumors have been confirmed. We're starting from ground zero, he says. We don't know what clothes the people of Srivijaya wore, what their tastes were, what kinds of ceramics they like to eat off. Even though this discovery has brought excitement to the scientific community, there is a downside. Divers and fishers sell the retrieved artifacts at the International Antiquities Market before archaeologists can take a look at them. Researchers could try to buy some items, but they're sold for millions of dollars worldwide. Most of the information we know about this El Dorado of the East was learned from merchant accounts of the city. These descriptions say Srivijaya was a kingdom of human-eating snakes and multilingual parrots. That's weird. Some say its active volcanoes gave the town an eerie and enigmatic sight, and all stories emphasize the amount of gold available there. Travel reports were a common way to describe cities in ancient times. In case you didn't know, this is how the legend of El Dorado originally began. As European explorers began their excavations in South American lands back in the 1500s, the word got out that an Amazonian civilization used to paint their leader in gold as an offering to higher powers. The legend of El Hombre Dorado, also known as the Golden Man, began to quickly spread around Europe. It turned out that it was only a ceremonial piece of pre-Columbian civilization. It had nothing to do with the land of infinite gold. Now, no one knows what brought about the decline of the Srivijaya Empire. Some speculate that its active volcanoes could have swallowed it, or maybe wooden houses built above the river eventually sank. Maybe if divers keep retrieving lost items from the bottom of the river, archaeologists will be able to figure out what happened to the city. It seems to be quite common in the history of the world. Some ancient civilizations disappeared without a trace, as happened with the Mayan civilization, for example. The Mayans managed to build one of the biggest empires in pre-Columbian America. It was believed to be home to over 2 million people, and it thrived for over 6 centuries. Its sudden demise is something that bothers archaeologists and scientists alike. The Mayans began to settle in South America as early as 1500 BCE. Their civilization spanned Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Belize. They are believed to have built around 40 cities at the height of their empire. They also developed a complex hieroglyph system that has been studied since it was discovered by modern scientists. The Mayans were keen engineers, astronomers, and farmers. They were post-nomadic people that settled in vast areas of farmland where they could grow corn and other types of vegetables. Archaeologists are still learning a lot about the Mayan civilization by examining their ruins. The city of Chichen Itza, located in the Yucatan Peninsula, is one of the most important Mayan sites unearthed today. The site is made up of a total of 26 ruins, and it is home to a world-famous pyramid known as El Castillo. It consists of a series of square terraces with stairways on each of the 4 sides of the temple. It was built as an homage to a feathered serpent deity. The Mayans were such architectural geniuses that they managed to build a pyramid that cast a particular shadow. More specifically, in the late afternoon during the spring and fall equinoxes, the pyramid casts several triangular shadows that create the illusion of a feathered serpent crawling down the pyramid. And they created this with none of the tech we have today. The city is so amazing that since 2007, it has been considered one of the 7 wonders of the New World. The Mayan Empire thrived for over 6 centuries due to their wise resource management system and astronomical knowledge. They were able to accurately predict eclipses, and using their rudimentary technology, could even locate Venus and Mars. They had everything to thrive for much longer than they actually did. This is why the Mayans' fall intrigues modern scientists so much. No one has been able to understand completely what led to their demise. That is, until a recent discovery. A study done by NASA claims it can explain what might have happened. Scientists have uncovered a sample of pollen trapped for over 1,200 years in ancient layers of lake sediment, which dates back to the time just before the collapse of the civilization. The analysis has revealed something completely new about the Mayans. Instead of the suspected claims that the Mayans disappeared due to terrible disease or some extended conflict in the region, it could have happened due to deforestation. Perhaps to build their entire empire, they had to cut a lot of trees. Without trees, their soil could have eroded, and all their fertile lands could have slowly and gradually become barren. According to NASA scientists, the temperatures in the region could have risen by about 6 degrees, and from that point on, the land would have become even drier and crops more difficult to grow. Basically, NASA says that the Mayans couldn't do the sole thing that made them thrive, which was agriculture, and their kingdom began to decline. Oh yeah, and this theory was supported by yet another find. Archaeologists found skeletons from the time of the empire. Those had prominent signs of malnutrition. This theory might really shed new light on Mayan history. It could explain what brought down such a powerful civilization. So, what do you say? Which theory is true? Have we actually managed to find out the reason for the fall of the Mayan Empire?